My sister stole my fiancé during my cancer treatment, so I revealed her secret pregnancy at her bridal shower. The chemo port in my chest was still leaking a bead of saline when I scrolled through my own engagement photos and realized the man smiling beside me had stopped being mine 3 months ago. I was sitting in a plastic infusion chair at Mercy West Oncology, hooked to a bag of carboplatin, when my phone buzzed with a notification from a baby registry website. The email was addressed to me by accident, the kind of mistake that happens when someone types in a familiar address out of habit. It congratulated me on starting my registry and listed the recipient's name at the top in cheerful pink lettering, Gisela Vance, my sister, the woman who had been driving me to every single appointment for 11 weeks. I read it 3 times before the nausea hit, and I couldn't tell if it was the chemicals dripping into my vein or the realization sliding into my ribs like a cold knife. My fiancé Soren had proposed to me on a beach in Oregon 18 months earlier, the kind of proposal that involved a string quartet hidden in the dunes and a ring he had saved for 2 years to afford. We had picked out a venue together, a converted barn in the Willamette Valley. And I had spent 6 months obsessing over centerpieces before the lump in my left breast turned my whole life into a series of waiting rooms. Stage 2, the oncologist had said. Treatable. Aggressive, but treatable. Soren had held my hand through the diagnosis. I had been a 4th grade teacher for 9 years when the diagnosis came, and my classroom was the kind of place where kids brought me dandelions and called me their favorite person. I lived for those small moments because my own family had never been particularly warm. Our mother, Adelaide, was the kind of woman who measured love in trophies and report cards, and Gisela had always been the trophy. 2 years younger than me, blonde where I was brunette, social where I was quiet, the kind of person who walked into a room and rearranged the gravity. When I introduced Soren to my family at a Christmas dinner 4 years ago, Gisela had laughed too loudly at his jokes and touched his arm 3 times during dessert. I noticed. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself the same thing when she volunteered to be my primary caregiver during treatment, brushing aside my mother's half-hearted offers with a soft, "Mom, you know I'm better at this stuff." She had quit her remote marketing job that February, claiming burnout, and suddenly had endless time to drive me to Mercy West 3 times a week. She would sit in the waiting room with her laptop, occasionally disappearing to take phone calls, returning with coffee she never drank. Soren visited me at the apartment every evening, but he had stopped staying over around week 4 of treatment. He said the chemo smell on my skin gave him migraines. I believed him because believing him was easier than the alternative, and because I was so tired I could barely lift a fork. The registry email sat open on my phone while the carboplatin finished its slow drip into my body. I clicked through to the actual website and stared at the page. A baby registry. Strollers, bassinets, a specific model of breast pump in muted sage green. The estimated due date was listed at the bottom, October 14th. I did the math twice because chemo brain made everything slower. 22 weeks, conception in mid-January, the same month Soren stopped staying over. The same month Gisela showed up at my apartment with a casserole and a brand new haircut, telling me she just wanted to be there for me through everything. I set the phone face down on my knee and stared at the ceiling tiles until the nurse came to unhook me. The drive home that afternoon was the strangest 40 minutes of my life. Gisela picked me up in her white Subaru Outback, the one she had bought used after quitting her job, and she chatted the entire way about a podcast she was loving. She wore a loose cream sweater that I now realized she had been wearing for weeks, even though the weather had warmed into late spring. She had stopped wearing fitted clothes around me sometime in March. I had assumed she was self-conscious about gaining weight because I was losing it. I watched her hands on the steering wheel, the way she kept one resting lightly across her stomach when she thought I wasn't looking, and I felt something in my chest go very still and very cold. Not rage. Not yet. Just clarity. Sharp as a scalpel. When we got back to my apartment, she helped me to the couch and made me a cup of ginger tea and asked if I wanted her to stay over. I said no. I needed sleep, and I needed her to leave, because if she stayed 1 more minute, I was going to throw the ceramic mug at her perfect blonde head. She kissed my forehead before she left, and her perfume was something new, something expensive, something that smelled like the kind of gift a man buys when he's trying to compensate. After the door closed, I sat in the dark for 2 hours, and then I did the only thing I could think to do. I called my best friend, Imani Brookhart, a paralegal I had known since college, and I asked her if she would help me figure out what was really happening to my life. Imani arrived the next morning with 2 coffees and a laptop, and the kind of focused calm that made her the best paralegal at her firm. She had worked for a family law attorney named Dr. Patrice Lemoine, a divorce specialist who held a law degree from Columbia and a doctorate in clinical psychology. And Imani had learned over 6 years exactly how to document a betrayal. She sat at my kitchen table and listened to me explain the registry email, the timing, the haircut, the sweaters, the perfume. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she opened her laptop and said, "Okay, before you do anything else, we gather. We don't accuse, we don't react. We build a case the way Patrice would build it. Quiet, complete, and undeniable." The first thing she had me do was log into the registry account using the link from the email. The website had auto-saved the credentials because Gisela had apparently entered my email as a backup contact and then forgotten. We scrolled through every item on the list. The registry was being shared between two people, Gisela Vance and Soren Halverson. My fiancé's full legal name, listed as the co-parent, with his phone number and his work address at the architecture firm where he had been a junior partner for 3 years. Imani took screenshots of everything and saved them to a folder she titled with a date and a case number, the way she had been trained. She told me to change nothing, alter nothing, log out, and never log back in. Chain of custody, she said. We don't touch the original. The second thing she did was call Dr. Lemoyne on speakerphone and explain the situation in clinical, neutral terms. Patrice listened, asked 3 sharp questions, and then said something I have never forgotten. She said that betrayal of this magnitude almost always leaves a paper trail, because people who do these things believe they are smarter than the people they're hurting, and that arrogance makes them sloppy. She told me to make a list of every joint account I shared with Soren, every shared subscription, every place his name appeared alongside mine. She told me to do it that afternoon, before he had any reason to suspect anything had changed. She told me to come into her office on Thursday for a free consultation, and she told me to bring everything. I spent the rest of that day making the list while Imani made me eat soup. Soren and I had a joint savings account at Pacific Crest Credit Union that we had opened for the wedding, with $11,400 in it as of the last statement. We had a shared Verizon plan. We had a shared streaming bundle. We had a lease on the apartment where I was currently sitting, with both our names on it, though he had been staying at his brother's place to give me space to rest for nearly 3 months. I logged into the credit union account from my laptop and stared at the balance. Then I scrolled through the transaction history, and my stomach dropped the way it had in the infusion chair. 3 withdrawals over the past 4 months, each for $2,000, each labeled simply transfer. None of them authorized by me. Imani took screenshots of those too. Then she walked me through the Verizon account, which still listed me as the primary holder, and we pulled the call detail records for the past 6 months. Soren's number appeared in Gisela's call log 17 times in January alone, including one call at 2 in the morning on January 11th that lasted 43 minutes. I had been at the hospital that night for a fever that turned out to be a side effect of my first round of chemo. I remembered it clearly because I had called Soren and he hadn't picked up, and Gisela had shown up at the ER an hour later, breathless, apologizing for being slow, saying she had been asleep. I sat at the kitchen table and put my forehead on the cool wood and tried to breathe through the nausea. By the end of the week, I had a folder on my desktop that contained 43 pages of evidence. Imani helped me organize it the way Patrice had instructed. Tab 1, the registry. Tab 2, the bank withdrawals. Tab 3, the phone records. Tab 4, photographs I had quietly taken on my phone of receipts I found in Gisela's purse when she left it on my counter, including a receipt for a maternity dress from a boutique in the Pearl District dated April 8th. Tab 5, a series of text messages I had screenshotted from my mother's phone when I visited her that Saturday, including one from Gisela that read, "Don't tell her yet, she has enough to deal with. We'll figure out timing after the wedding." I had no idea what wedding Gisela was referring to. I added that question to my notes. The Thursday consultation with Dr. Patrice Lemoyne took place in a corner office on the 11th floor of a glass tower downtown. Patrice was a tall woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked locks and the kind of presence that made you sit up straighter without being asked. She read through my folder for 38 minutes without speaking, occasionally making a note on a legal pad. When she finished, she folded her hands on her desk and said, "I want to be very clear with you about what you have here. You have grounds for a civil suit against your sister for alienation of affection, which is still actionable in Oregon under certain circumstances. You have evidence of financial fraud regarding the joint account withdrawals. And you have a paternity question that, if answered the way I suspect it will be, gives you significant leverage. But none of that is what you actually want." She looked at me over her reading glasses and asked what I actually wanted, and I told her the truth. I wanted my life back. I wanted my dignity back. I wanted my sister and my fiancé to understand that I was not a quiet, dying thing they could step over on their way to a new life. Patrice nodded slowly and said that she could help me with the legal piece, but that the emotional piece was something I would have to design myself. She gave me a referral to a trauma therapist named Dr. Cordell Akiyama. a licensed psychologist who specialized in medical trauma and family betrayal, and she told me to start seeing him immediately. She said the next 6 months were going to require a version of me I hadn't met yet, and that version needed support. I made the appointment from the parking garage. Dr. Akiyama's office was on the second floor of a converted Craftsman in Northwest Portland, and he was a soft-spoken man in his late 40s with kind eyes and a deliberate way of speaking. In our first session, I told him everything in one long, unbroken sentence, and when I finished, he handed me a tissue and said, "I want you to know that the rage you're feeling is not a symptom. It is information. Your body is telling you that something sacred has been violated. We are not going to medicate that away. We are going to listen to it." That was the moment I started crying, for the first time since the diagnosis, and I cried for almost an hour. And when I left his office, I felt 30 pounds lighter and 100 degrees clearer. Over the next 4 weeks, I continued chemotherapy. I let Gisela drive me to every appointment. I let her bring me ginger tea and rub my back when I vomited and tell me how proud she was of how strong I was being. I smiled at her. I thanked her. I asked her about her life and listened to her lie to my face about her stomach issues that were making her bloated, about her new diet that required her to avoid sushi and soft cheese, about her stress at work that was making her tired. I noted everything. I texted Imani after every visit with new observations, and Imani added them to the folder. Patrice had told me that the goal was patience. The goal was to let them believe they were winning, because people who believe they are winning stop being careful. Then, in the middle of my 5th cycle of chemo, my mother Adelaide called me on a Wednesday evening and asked me, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound casual, if I would consider being a bridesmaid at Gisela's wedding. I almost dropped the phone. I asked her what wedding, and Adelaide stammered for a moment and then said, "Oh, sweetheart, I thought she had told you. She and Soren have been spending so much time together while you've been sick, and they've grown so close and they want to get married in September. They wanted to wait until you were stronger to share the news." I sat on my couch with the phone pressed to my ear and watched the late afternoon light move across my living room wall and felt absolutely nothing for a full 30 seconds. When I finally spoke, my voice came out perfectly steady. I said, "Mom, are you telling me that my fiancé and my sister are engaged to each other?" Adelaide started crying then, the kind of performative crying she had been deploying my entire life when she wanted to be the victim of her own actions. She said she hadn't known how to tell me. She said Gisela had begged her not to upset me during treatment. She said sometimes love just happens, and we have to accept it. She said Soren had told her months ago that the cancer had changed me, that I wasn't the same person, that he couldn't picture a future with someone who was so consumed by their illness. I let her talk. I let her dig the grave deeper with every sentence. Then I said I needed to go, and I hung up the phone. I called Imani, I called Patrice, I called Dr. Akiyama and asked for an emergency session. By the time I got to his office that night, I had stopped shaking and started thinking. Cordell met me at the door and walked me through a grounding exercise before I could even say hello. Then he sat across from me and asked me what I wanted to do. Not what I felt, what I wanted to do. I told him I wanted to expose them. I told him I wanted to do it in a way that made the consequences impossible to spin or minimize. I told him I wanted Gisela to feel exactly what I had felt when I read that registry email, only worse because she was the one who had built her happiness on top of my hospital bed. He nodded. He said that wanting that was reasonable. He said acting on it required a plan. Patrice and Imani met me at the law office the next morning. The 3 of us sat around the conference table and built a strategy that took 6 hours to finalize. Patrice walked me through the legal options. I would file a claim for the unauthorized withdrawals from our joint account, which Soren had used to put a deposit on a house in Lake Oswego, a detail Imani had uncovered through a property records search. I would have the lease on my current apartment legally severed, with Soren responsible for back rent on the months he had been gone. I would file for the return of my engagement ring, which legally remained my property under Oregon law since the engagement had been broken by his actions. And I would prepare a civil complaint that could be filed within 72 hours of the exposure. But the legal piece was only one layer. The second layer was the truth itself and how it would be delivered. Imani had received an invitation in the mail 2 days earlier, addressed to me, to Gisela's bridal shower. It was scheduled for the 3rd Saturday in July at a vineyard in Dundee, with 80 guests expected, including my mother, my aunts, Soren's parents, Soren's sister, and every woman from Gisela's high school friend group who had ever made a comment about how I was the less fun sister. The invitation included a registry link, a dress code of garden party pastels, and a note from my mother saying she hoped I would feel well enough to attend. I had not been told about the engagement. I had been invited to the shower. I read the invitation aloud to Imani and Patrice said, Well, that solves the question of venue. We spent the next 3 weeks preparing. I continued chemotherapy. I finished my 5th cycle and started my 6th. My hair, which had thinned considerably, was now mostly gone, and I had been wearing a soft cotton scarf in earthy colors that Dr. Akiyama said suited me. Gisela continued to drive me to appointments. She told me about her exciting news on a Thursday afternoon during the 4th week, sitting beside me in the infusion suite while the nurse adjusted my IV. She held my hand. She cried. She said she knew this would be hard for me, but that she hoped I could find it in my heart to be happy for her and Soren. She said love had surprised her. She said she had fought it for a long time, but it was bigger than both of them. I squeezed her hand and told her I was happy for her. I told her I would be there for her, the way she had been there for me. The lie came out of my mouth like water from a tap. That night, I sat across from Imani at my kitchen table, and we finalized the slideshow. Imani had a contact who worked AV at the Vineyard, a woman named Halia Brenica, who had been a college friend of hers, and who now ran a small event production company. Halia agreed to handle the technical setup in exchange for a flat fee and a non-disclosure agreement. The plan was simple. During the toast portion of the shower, when Gisela would inevitably stand up to thank everyone for coming, Halia would cue up a presentation on the venue's main screen that I had prepared. The presentation contained 43 pages of evidence, condensed into a 13-minute visual timeline with documents shown on screen and a voiceover I had recorded with Patrice's guidance to ensure every claim was legally defensible. I also obtained, with Patrice's help and through entirely legal channels, a paternity test result. 2 weeks before the shower, I had asked Gisela to come over to my apartment for a sister night. I made her tea. I poured her a glass of sparkling water in a wine glass because she was watching her weight. When she went to the bathroom, I collected the rim of the glass with a sterile swab from a kit Patrice had ordered for me. I sent the swab to a private lab along with a sample I had collected from Soren's toothbrush during a visit 2 days later, when he had stopped by to check in on me and pretend to care. The lab returned a sibling DNA match with 99.8% certainty. The child Gisela was carrying was Soren's. I had it in writing on lab letterhead. I added it to the presentation. The Saturday of the bridal shower arrived warm and golden, the kind of late July day in Oregon that feels like a postcard. I dressed in a soft blush linen dress that Dr. Akiyama had helped me pick out because he said I deserved to walk into that room looking like myself, not like a victim. I wore the scarf in cream silk. I wore the diamond earrings my grandmother had left me. I drove myself to the Vineyard because Gisela was busy preparing for her own party and because I needed the 45-minute drive to breathe. Imani followed in her own car. Patrice was on standby at her office in case anything required immediate legal documentation. Halia was already on site, having arrived at dawn to set up the AV. Everything was in place. I parked in the gravel lot and sat in my car for 10 minutes and listened to my own heartbeat. The Vineyard's main hall was decorated in cream and sage and gold, with garlands of eucalyptus draped over every surface and a long banquet table set for 80. Gisela was wearing a white sundress with a flowing empire waist that disguised her now obvious pregnancy, though anyone paying attention could see the shape of her body underneath. She was radiant. She was glowing. She was holding court in the center of the room when I walked in, and the entire crowd went quiet for a moment when they saw me. My mother rushed over with her arms outstretched and tears already brimming. "Oh, sweetheart, you came. You look beautiful. This means so much to your sister." I let her hug me. I smiled. I said I wouldn't miss it for anything. Gisela came over and kissed my cheek and whispered that she was so glad I was being mature about everything. I told her I had a surprise for her. The shower proceeded according to plan. There were games involving baby photos and trivia about Gisela's life. There was a brunch served at noon with mimosas for everyone, except, conspicuously, the bride. There were gifts opened slowly while Gisela exclaimed over each one. I sat at a table with 3 of her high school friends, all of whom kept glancing at me with the kind of pity that made my teeth ache. Around 2 in the afternoon, my mother stood up at the head of the table and clinked her champagne glass with a butter knife and announced that it was time for toasts. She gave the first one, a saccharine speech about how proud she was of both her daughters. Then she invited anyone who wanted to share something to come up to the small podium at the front of the room. I waited. I let 3 of Gisela's friends give their toasts. I let Soren's mother stand up and welcome Gisela to the family, a woman who had attended my own engagement party 18 months earlier and called me her future daughter. I watched her hug Gisela and felt nothing. Then, when my mother turned to me with raised eyebrows and an expectant smile, I stood up. The room turned. I walked to the front. I took the small wireless microphone from the podium. I made eye contact with Holly at the back of the room, and she gave me a tiny nod. I took a breath. I looked at Gisela, who was sitting at the head table with her hand resting protectively over her stomach, in a gesture she could no longer control. And I smiled at her the way she had been smiling at me for months. I said, "When I was diagnosed with breast cancer last December, my sister Gisela quit her job to take care of me. She drove me to every chemotherapy appointment. She held my hair back when I was sick. She told me over and over that family was the most important thing in the world to her, and that she would do anything for me. I want everyone here to know how grateful I am for everything she did during the hardest year of my life." Gisela's eyes filled with tears. The room murmured in approval. Soren's mother dabbed at her cheek with a napkin. My own mother beamed. I waited for the moment to settle, and then I continued. "I also want to share with everyone a different kind of story, one that I think Gisela has been wanting to tell for a long time, and that I am happy to help her tell today." I nodded at Halia. The screen behind me, which had been displaying a tasteful slideshow of Gisela's baby photos, flickered and changed. The first slide appeared, a screenshot of the baby registry email with both names clearly visible. Gisela Vance, Soren Halverson, estimated due date October 14th. The room went absolutely silent. I heard a glass click against a plate somewhere in the back. I kept my voice perfectly steady. I said, 3 months ago, while I was sitting in an infusion chair receiving chemotherapy, I received this email by accident. My sister had registered for a baby with my fiancé and listed my email address as a backup contact. The baby is due in October. The conception, as you can see from the timeline, occurred in mid-January, approximately 6 weeks after I started chemotherapy. Gisela stood up. She tried to say something. No words came out. Soren's mother stood up next, her face draining of color so fast I could see it happen from across the room. The slideshow advanced. The screen now displayed the bank statements from Pacific Crest Credit Union, with the 3 unauthorized withdrawals highlighted in red. I said, "During the same period, my fiancé Soren withdrew $6,000 from our joint wedding savings account without my knowledge or authorization. According to property records, that money was used as a deposit on a house in Lake Oswego purchased in May, with my sister listed as a co-buyer." The screen changed again. Property records. Both names. A photograph of the house pulled from the real estate listing. My mother sat down very slowly. The slideshow continued. Phone records showing the 17 calls between Soren and Gisela in January, including the 43-minute call at 2 in the morning while I was in the emergency room. Receipts from the maternity boutique, photographs of Gisela in fitted clothing from December, next to recent photographs of her in loose sweaters and empire waists. The text from her phone, screenshotted from my mother's device, that read, "Don't tell her yet. She has enough to deal with. We'll figure out timing after the wedding." And then, finally, the last slide. The lab report from the private genetics laboratory with the letterhead clearly visible, showing the sibling DNA match between Soren and the fetus Gisela was carrying. 99.8% certainty. The room made a sound I had never heard before, a collective intake of breath like a wave hitting sand. Gisela was crying now. She was crying the way she used to cry when she was 12, and got caught stealing something from my room. Loud, performative, with her hands covering her face. My mother had gone completely still. Soren's mother had sat back down and was staring at her own daughter, Soren's sister, who was staring at her phone with her mouth open. I kept the microphone in my hand. I said, "I want to be very clear about something. I am not here to ruin Gisela's day. Gisela ruined her own day 8 months ago when she decided to sleep with my fiancé while I was undergoing chemotherapy. I am simply making sure that everyone who came here today to celebrate her engagement understands what they are actually celebrating. I think you all deserve that information before you give her any more gifts." I set the microphone down on the podium. I walked back to my table. I picked up my purse. The room was still completely silent, except for Gisela's sobbing and the soft electronic hum of the projector. As I walked toward the exit, I heard chairs scraping. I heard a woman's voice, someone I didn't know, saying loudly, "I think I need to leave." I heard another voice, Soren's mother, saying in a tone I will remember for the rest of my life, "Where is my son? Where is my son right now?" I walked through the doors and into the parking lot, and the late afternoon sun hit my face, and I did not cry. I got into my car. I started the engine. I drove away from that vineyard, and I did not look back, and I felt the way Dr. Akiyama had said I would feel. Lighter, clearer, free. The fallout began within 48 hours. Imani filed the civil complaint on Monday morning. Patrice served Soren personally at his office on Tuesday morning, with paperwork demanding the return of the $6,000, the engagement ring, and his signature on a lease severance for our apartment with full back rent for the months he had been gone. He had no legal grounds to refuse any of it. His firm, when they learned the details of the situation through the inevitable gossip network of a small architecture community in Portland, quietly suggested he take some personal time. He resigned within 3 weeks. The house in Lake Oswego went into legal limbo. Gisella's name was on the deed, but the down payment was traceable to my joint account, and Patrice had filed a lien. My mother called me 47 times in the first week. I did not answer. She left voicemails that escalated from concerned to apologetic to enraged to apologetic again. I forwarded them all to Dr. Akiyama, who said they were textbook examples of an enmeshed parent who had chosen her favorite child and was now panicking that the family system had collapsed. He encouraged me to set a boundary and stop engaging. I sent her a single text message on the 10th day. It said, "I will not be in contact for the foreseeable future. If you would like to repair this relationship someday, you will need to start by acknowledging that you knew about the affair and help them hide it. Until then, please do not contact me." She has not stopped trying. I have not responded. Gisela went into early labor in late August, 6 weeks before her due date. The baby, a girl, spent 11 days in the NICU but survived. Soren was at the hospital, so was my mother. I was not invited, and I would not have gone. I learned about the birth through Imani, who had heard it from a mutual friend. Gisela tried to call me 3 times that week. I blocked her number. She wrote me a 4-page letter that arrived in my mailbox in September, in which she explained that the affair had started during one of my hospital stays when she and Soren had bonded over their shared fear of losing me, and that what had begun as comfort had turned into love, and that she hoped someday I could understand. I read the letter once. I shredded it. I did not respond. The civil suit settled in October. Soren returned the $6,000 with interest. The engagement ring was returned to me by certified mail. The lease was severed, and he paid the back rent. The house in Lake Oswego was sold under duress, with proceeds split according to a settlement Patrice negotiated, and I received a portion that covered my legal fees and a substantial down payment on a small craftsman bungalow in Northeast Portland that I bought in November. I moved out of the apartment I had shared with Soren on the first weekend of December, almost exactly 1 year after my diagnosis. I painted the new house in colors that were entirely my own: soft greens, warm whites, a deep navy in the bedroom that made me feel like I was sleeping inside the ocean. I finished chemotherapy in December and rang the bell at Mercy West Oncology with Imani and Dr. Akiyama in attendance. My oncologist, a brilliant woman named Dr. Una Halberstrom, who had been treating me for 12 months, told me that my scans were clear and that I was officially in remission. I cried in her office for a long time, and she let me, and when I finally stopped, she handed me a tissue and said something I have never forgotten. She said, "The cancer was a hard year, but you walked into my office a different woman than the one walking out today. I don't know what happened in your personal life this year, but whoever she is now, she's the one I want to see at your follow-up appointments." I thanked her. I made my next appointment for 3 months out. In March, almost a year after the registry email arrived in my inbox, I went back to teaching. The school district had held my position for me through the entire year of treatment, and my 4th graders welcomed me back with a banner that said, "Welcome home, Miss Vance," in 26 different colors of marker. One of them, a small girl named Ophelia, who had been in my class the year before and had requested to be in it again, brought me a dandelion she had picked from the playground. She handed it to me very seriously and said, "My mom told me you were sick last year. I'm really glad you're better." I put the dandelion in a small glass of water on my desk, and I kept it there until it dried. And then I pressed it between the pages of the planning notebook I used every day. 2 years have passed since the bridal shower. Gisela and Soren did not get married. She lives in a small apartment in Beaverton with her daughter and works in customer service at a software company. Soren moved to Seattle 8 months after the shower and has not been heard from since, at least not by anyone in his old life in Portland. My mother and I have not spoken. Adelaide tried twice more in the first year, with increasingly desperate letters, but I held the line. Dr. Akiyama and I still meet once a month. He says I am one of his proudest cases, not because of what I did, but because of how I built a life afterward that was authentically mine, with no borrowed pieces from the one that was stolen. I started dating again last spring. His name is Tomasz Beckenridge, and he is a kindergarten teacher at a school 2 miles from mine, and he is patient and kind and laughs at my jokes in a way that suggests he actually finds them funny. He knows the whole story. I told him on our 3rd date because I did not want to waste either of our time, and he listened all the way through, and then he said, "I am so sorry that happened to you, and I am so glad you are sitting across from me right now." He did not try to fix it. He did not minimize it. He just acknowledged it and asked if I wanted dessert. We have been together for 10 months. He has not met my family because I no longer have one in any practical sense, but he has met Imani, and Imani has approved.